Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to introduce Batfish, which is a tool that I have been using it for about 2 years, and I think it's very useful for network professionals. So what is Batfish? Batfish is an open source tool that have been developed for about a few years now, and it belongs to a category of tools for network verification and validation. So this tool, unlike simulations, it takes the configuration files, device configuration files, and analyze them, build a model for the network, and then use this model to validate the network and guarantees the correctness of the configuration. As I mentioned in the previous slide, Batfish takes the configuration files and other information as well and builds a vendor-independent data model, and then uses that model to find the forwarding information base and the routing information base for the network. And from that information, it can discover if packets can flow from every source to every destination, or if there is an impact because of a failure, or what are the routing advertisement, and other information as well from that model. Batfish can do a lot of neat things. So, for example, you can discover any errors in the configuration files. It tells you if there is a missing line or if there is a line that is misconfigured. It can also discover if packets can go from point A to point B in any part of the network. It can check the routing policies. It can tell you if IPsec is properly configured and working. It can detect any vulnerabilities in the access lists. It can also tell you what happens if a router is not reachable or if an interface is down, right? So all of this can be done using Batfish, and it's done based on the data model that Batfish builds. Batfish covers a huge gap in today's tool set for network professionals. So let me give you an example. If you are trying to introduce a new configuration change to a production network, you have a couple of choices. You can test this configuration in a lab using a subset of devices, but you need to have the hardware and you need to have the images to build this lab, right? Or you can use emulators like GNS3 and test your configuration. In both cases, you need to use your knowledge to be able to test all possible scenarios and discover all the problems. If you use Batfish, you don't need any of that. You just need you need to have the configuration files themselves, and Batfish will guarantee the correctness, which is not possible using simulators or lab environment. It guarantees the correctness. It guarantees that all possible flows are correct, or discovers errors if there are errors. Batfish can also replicate things that you cannot replicate using emulators. For example, any ISPs you have, any cloud environment you have, any external networks you have, you can replicate them using Batfish. Batfish also can be incorporated in a CI/CD pipeline. So you can take the configuration files and automate the change. So you push them to the pipeline, Batfish will check the configuration, and if the configuration is correct, the configuration can be pushed into production. All of this can happen automatically. What Batfish can do is to verify specific software features, right? Because it's vendor independent, so it cannot tell you this image from this vendor is correct, or it doesn't have errors, or it doesn't have bugs, or this feature works or not. It cannot do that, and it also cannot be used for performance testing. So if you need to test performance, then you have to use other tools. So Batfish interacts with users through a set of questions. So what are the questions? They are basically a function or Python functions. Batfish builds the data model, and then the user can use these Python functions to get information from the data model. So there are about 70 questions that cover a lot of topics. For example, if the user wants to verify if there is a route for packets to go from source to destination throughout the network, so that can be checked by Batfish. It can also You can also check if routing protocols are configured properly and there is a route for every destination in the network. You can also see the effect of access lists. Can I block this protocol, or is this protocol is allowed through the network? So this can be checked. Also, if there are any vulnerabilities or errors in the configuration of the access lists. You can also test different failure scenario. What if this interface is down? How the traffic will be rerouted? What if this router is down? How the network will react to this change? And also, it checks the configuration itself, any inconsistencies. Let's say you configure access list number 10, but you don't use it in the network, or you duplicate an IP address, so you have an IP address that is used twice in the network configuration. So that something that Batfish can discover and alert you to. To use Batfish, you need two components. You need the Batfish server itself, which is usually given as Docker container. You can install Docker in a machine and run the Batfish container. You also need to have a Python script to ask the questions to the data model, right? So you write Python code, take the configuration files, upload them. Configuration files represent a snapshot, what's called a snapshot, which is an instant of the network the current status of the network. So that is called a snapshot. So you upload the snapshot, and then you start asking questions using Python script. There is a Python library called PyBatfish, which is used to interact with Batfish server. The answers come as JSON or as pandas frames. So you can manipulate those further. You can extract more information from the answers, and you can write reports or display alerts or do any things that Python can do. Batfish itself is written in the background as Java, but the interface is all Python. There are multiple use cases for Batfish. The first one is what I mentioned before. You take configuration files and check those configuration files before deployment, right, to make sure that they are correct. Another use case is to see the impact of any change you make. So you need two sets of configuration files, the old one and the new one, and you compare them together to see if any change in your routing policy had an impact on existing protocols, or if any change you made in the access list blocked protocols that you're not supposed to block, or allowed protocols and destinations you're not, or sources that you're not supposed to allow. So you compare two sets of configuration files. You can also detect any problems with existing firewall policies or access lists by using Batfish. You can troubleshoot problems. You have a problem in your network, you take the configuration files, use Batfish to discover what the problem is, because Batfish can investigate everything using the configuration files. Another thing that I discovered in Batfish is that I can use it to evaluate students' work. So in education, maybe in training, you ask students to build a network, and then you ask them to supply the configuration files to Batfish, and Batfish will give you a report on how the students accomplish the task. So all of these are use cases for Batfish. We can see that Batfish has many benefits here. One is automating a lot of manual tasks that are done right now by network professionals. So it eliminates a lot of work and let professionals focus on other things. Risk mitigations. Because of guarantees that Batfish provide, I can um, make sure that there are a lot of things that are checked, and therefore there is a less opportunities for failures there. Faster troubleshooting, right? Instead of trying the manual ping and trace route and checking the configuration manually, and I can use Batfish to do this much faster. I can also use Batfish to check compliance and security by comparing with existing policies. So all of these are benefits for Batfish that are very hard to replicate with other tools. So Batfish reads configuration files and change them into a vendor-independent data model. So it needs to understand those configuration files. Now, configuration files come from a lot of vendors. Every vendor has a different way of representing the configuration. So Batfish understand a lot of them. Here is a list of the vendors that Batfish understands. And because it's open source, there is a possibility for users to add support for those vendors that don't exist in this list yet. But also having the name there doesn't mean that every feature is supported. The Batfish does not support every feature because there are always new features coming. So Batfish may not be able to support everything that's produced by the vendor right away. So you have to be aware of this before using Batfish. There are many resources out there to learn about Batfish, so I just selected the two important ones, which is the website for Batfish itself, and also the documentation for PyBatfish, which you will need to write the questions and extract information from Batfish. I also wrote a review about Batfish in my blog there, so you can go to adhocnode.com and read it. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you got interested in Batfish and exploring it further.